Welcome to the Sports Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Luhr, and excited to cross the Atlantic Ocean again, landing in Santa Fe, New Mexico today to catch up with Mr. Terrence Burns. Welcome to the podcast, Terrence.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Nice to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation. We had a great chat. It was only a couple of months back now, I think, when we first spoke. And I'm really looking forward to hearing these stories and this time recording them and capturing all that wisdom which you were sharing at that time. So, but before we get there, let me just sort of do the usual quick intro for anyone who might not know you. Terrence has been around this industry for many decades, and we'll be discovering plenty of that here while we're talking. But you are really a specialist in the Olympic Games sponsorship space, strategies, consulting, and of course the Olympic and World Cup bidding processes. So we're really going to have a good look at that, and there's some great stories and sharing. I know we'll hear from you. So, and you also published author. So maybe you can share a bit on that as well. What exactly you published there? So how we always get started in the podcast is really at the really beginning. And in your case, that was an interesting start as well, I guess, because you were working for Delta Airlines. So let's take ourselves back there and then we unravel the stories right from there.
No worries at all. You're right. I did start with Delta Airlines right out of undergraduate school. I went to Emory University in Atlanta. I wanted to be a dentist, Marcus, for some reason, unbeknownst to me and everybody else, I lacked the two skills that one needed to be a dentist, which was proficiency in organic chemistry, I guess, and math. And so in my junior year with a biology minor, they decided I should go to business school. So I went to the business school, and being 22 years old, the most important thing in my life was to fly for free around the world. And so I got a job with Delta. Wow. I didn't realize that you had to start at the bottom at Delta. I showed up at work with my suit on, the only suit I owned, and some nice shoes. And I was told to pick up a mop and start mopping. So I was a janitor for 2 years, cleaning toilets on midnight shift, second shift, day shift, etc.
Wow,
so that's a lot.
When they hired you, well, you must have been hired for a particular job. I mean, you don't just randomly go there, I guess. What was the job description? It wasn't cleaning toilets, I'm assuming.
No. In Delta in those days, they promoted only from within. Everybody started at the bottom, but I was hired for a position called Airport Passenger Assistant, which was a job they created to get more college graduates into the company because, honestly, a lot of people didn't want to be janitors. And
no doubt.
Right before I joined, they told me, "Oh, Terrence, we filled that position from within. We still would love for you to be a member of the Delta family. So show up at the jet base at 6:42 a.m. on January the 12th, 1981. Start your illustrious career." I'm actually starting my second book, and I'm writing about that experience right now.
Okay, cool.
And I vividly remember walking through the bowels of the giant maintenance facility in Atlanta with my little suit on, with a gentleman who was in torn, stinky, ragged rain gear, heading to a room where I would spend the next 2 years as a maintenance utility employee. So I was just happy to have a job, Marcus, honestly, in those days. It was pretty grim in the U.S. in terms of getting a job. And my dream was to work for Delta. So, you don't know what you don't know. So I was happy, and I learned probably more in those 2 years than I have anywhere else about humility and working hard.
Yeah. No, yeah, I can imagine. Amazing. That's an interesting start. Yeah. Now, obviously, you spent 15 years there, so somehow that early experience didn't deter you. So tell us a bit more then how you graduate through the ranks, which lets us then, to the Olympics down the line here.
Yeah. Well, I'll try not to bore you. It's not too interesting, but it's a series of jobs. You bid on jobs within Delta, and for my next job after being a janitor, I was a tool room supply attendant for another 6 years. Wow. And that's working a midnight shift, checking out tools to mechanics in the big hangar. So I spent about 2 years of that playing guitar at night. And then I realized that no one at Delta Airlines could care less that I was there. and that nothing would happen unless I did something myself. So I went back to graduate school, got my MBA at night, and somehow made the leap from tool room to a purchasing agent in the GO, which was the general offices. So I went from, 8 years as a blue collar person hitting the clock, literally the clock with a card every day to Monday morning. I had to go buy some suits and ties. I'd never written a memo. I'd never been in a business meeting. And I was suddenly in the GO, and I was a buyer. I was buying things like mainframe software, which I knew nothing about. I was buying airplane seats, transportation, etc. But I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to my MBA is in international business and affairs, and I wanted to be in something called international marketing at Delta, which was virtually impossible to get into. And I just pestered and badgered the hell out of everybody there. I was finally told you can't get into international marketing unless you are a domestic marketing sales rep, and that's impossible to get into in Atlanta. Atlanta was the hub of Delta. Right. You had to have many years to be in Atlanta marketing. You had to go to Boise, Idaho, or somewhere far away and toil away in the hinterlands and maybe get back. So I decided I wasn't going to do that. I was going to get into Atlanta marketing, and somehow I got an interview, and somehow I got the job. And I remember vividly in the interview, they said, "Why do you want to be a marketing rep?" I said, "I really don't. I just want this job to get to the international marketing job." Right. And they all were kind of put off by that. But somehow I got it, Marcus. Then literally 1 year later, got into international marketing and sales at Delta. And so that's 15 years punched into a few moments. But,
So
I did get to go to Europe. I did get to go to Europe and work on the Delta acquisition team. We bought Pan Am's European route structure. Pan Am's European route structure is part of the marketing team. I was based in Frankfurt, and my job was to go around to all of the Pan Am sales and marketing offices in Europe, and basically within a few days ascertain whether we were going to keep the people there or not. That's you talked about being an author. That's the book I wrote about that Delta experience.
Right, excellent.
Came back. Then they sent me to Russia in 1992, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. That in itself is a book. Then I came back to Russia, and I got a job somehow I got this job as the administrative assistant of the senior vice president of marketing, which apparently everybody in the marketing division wanted that job. I had no idea what it was. It's a 1 year stint where they pair a young person with a senior executive. I did that probably for about 9 months, and then we decided to sponsor the Olympic Games. And they came to me and said, "Do you want to manage that?" And I said, that's probably a lot more interesting than picking up the dry cleaning for the senior executive. So, yeah, I'll take that job. And there we go. Bob's your uncle.
Well, I love it. Well, so that gets us now into more of the Olympic world, which obviously we're going to spending pretty much the rest of the conversation here. And so, just describe a little bit exactly what you were doing for Delta. And this is obviously the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. What were you doing there in-house, and how that then, of course, led to, I guess, the next role there was Meridian.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was given the role in late 93, to manage Delta sponsorship of the games. It was a tenuous time for airlines everywhere, especially American ones. After the first Gulf War, Delta was losing money. It never lost money in its 60-year history. Mm-hmm. And suddenly the official airline of an event in a city that we have 90% of the market share. And I knew nothing about sports marketing, let alone Olympic marketing. But I did go out and hire consultants to help me, people like Rob Prasmark, people like Jan Katzoff, who is now working with me a little bit in my current role. And we had a great team within Delta to support me. And I think I learned one of the success in the corporate world is managing up. And I had great bosses. A lady named Judy Jordan was the best boss I ever had. Of course, the EVP of marketing was Bob Coggin, and the chairman and president and CEO of Delta at that time was a guy named Ron Allen. It became a real focus for the company and I had huge support, as I said, from above, which made it work. So long story short, because we didn't have a lot of cash, the deal was a $30 million deal. Roughly 10 of that was cash, and the rest was VIK. Necessity is the mother of invention. So I learned something that I still tell new sponsors. The Olympic sponsorship itself should not be viewed as a standalone marketing program. If you can't tie it to the existing objectives and goals of the company, you're kind of wasting your time. So I quickly learned that I had to have a revenue component, I had to have a brand component, and back in those days, it was kind of groundbreaking. We had an employee strategy, because in service brands like airlines or banks or pick any other service brand, your employees that meet and deal with the customers are really the brand ambassadors. It's not the advertising. It's not the tagline. It's the experience you have with that gate agent or that flight attendant or the check-in agent that makes or breaks the brand. So we focused. If I could do it again, I would probably double or treble my efforts on the employees. It was wildly popular inside of the company. We needed a feel-good story in those days. And Marcus, we were able to actually measure it because I had a very aggressive board that I had to meet with on a monthly basis. I'm sure anyone who's listening to this in the corporate world who's a sponsorship person knows how difficult that is. For Delta, it was a lot of money. In those days. And so I remember we had a guy named Ed Arts, who was the chairman of P&G on our board, who just did not understand. He didn't understand airline pricing. He thought it should be everyday low pricing, like selling peas or strawberries or whatever. And he definitely didn't understand what we were trying to do with the Olympics. So he was a nemesis in many ways, but because of that, he made us better. He made us focus really on what we could achieve. So the long story short of how that leap happened, we measured it, and we were able to demonstrably show what we achieved out of that sponsorship. And the IOC was intrigued with that. So when I moved over to Meridian, which I'll tell you about in a moment, that was really part and parcel of it. They felt that we, interestingly enough, were one of the first sponsors that they had heard of or dealt with that actually measured the efficacy of their investment.
That's really interesting. And I mean, before we move on from your airline experience, I had an airline experience too. I actually had a really short stint with American Airlines during my summer internship when I was doing my MBA. And this was related to the 1994 Football World Cup, where they were the official airline, right? And so I said, nowhere near your experience, but I saw a bit from an airline perspective, and similar there. There's a lot of learning there on every level. So it's interesting. Now, if I remember last time you were saying you were setting really clear KPIs, right? I think it was around employees and transaction, customer focus, etc. Maybe just share that a little bit, and then we move into, of course, how that, I guess, role there landed you in the Meridian then.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, we had it was 30 years ago, almost. It was the really early days of what you would call professional sponsorship practices. Now, I mean, today there are people within brands, within sponsorship sections of brands, departments of brands, who are really, really adept and professional at what they do. Back in those days, that just wasn't the case. So we had to quickly show our board and our stakeholders that this wasn't really about logo placement, because there are no logos, as you know, in an Olympic venue. You get no media. You have to buy that. So everything is an add-on. A cover. When I sell, and we'll talk about this, but selling an Olympic sponsorship, you really have to get the buyer to understand it's a cover charge to get into the bar.
To get to the party.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. If you want a beer, you got to buy it. If you want a hamburger, you got to buy it. If you want to dance with somebody, you got to buy it. So, to get Delta's senior officers and board to understand that was a bit of a trick, but we did. So, my KPIs were quite simple. I had to generate $30 million, which seems very small today, but it wasn't in those days. $30 million in incremental revenue that I had to prove and measure to pay for the rights fees.
Yep.
I had to hit a 65, I think, % level of awareness amongst our premium flyers. In those days, our premium frequent flyers, that we were the official airline of the 1996 games. And mind you, we had to split that category with United. United Airlines was the official airline of the USOC, and they wouldn't give that up. So not only did I have a hill to climb with sponsorship, I had to share the category. And then the third one, which was a little bit more mystical, we had some internal metrics around pride in the company, motivation, et cetera. But what we were able to do was to go to every single business vertical within Delta, where there was maintenance, in-flight, geo, accounting, et cetera. And I had the resources, i.e. tickets, rooms, apparel, merchandise. And I let every group define their own performance mechanisms with the company. So, for example, for in-flight, it was quite easy. We created a program where we let customers nominate flight attendants for their performance and their attitudes, et cetera. Places like Tech Ops, we let them design programs around everything from attendance to not breaking things, et cetera. And we let our employees, as a sponsor and as part of the torch relay, we had 100 slots, as I recall. And we took a fair amount of those slots and let them be employee nominated. So you could nominate a fellow employee based on whether they were a great mechanic or whether they were just a great person. Or what. And that was just so wonderful to see that manifest in the pride of these people. And a quick aside, I did get to run with the torch. And honestly, after 2.5 years of being a sponsor and dealing with ACOG, which was the organizing committee, I think everybody out there who's a sponsor understands the difficulties sometimes of dealing with the Olympic parties. I was kind of frustrated. And I had already made the decision to leave and join Meridian, which we can get to in a moment. And I was having second thoughts, Marcus. I was really 15 years is a lot of time to put into a career and to walk away from it, which was something which, even though it wasn't risky, it was a startup, et cetera. But on the final day, the day of opening ceremonies, I ran with the Olympic torch early in the morning in a, a disadvantaged neighborhood in Atlanta. And I was on a bus with a bunch of people who were also running with the torch. And all of these were extraordinary people. And they were telling their stories about how they were chosen to run with the Olympic torch, the Olympic flame. And then it got to me, and I didn't have a great story other than I was just representing a sponsor who spent a lot of money. So I felt a little embarrassed about it. But I got out, and they set you out somewhere. And suddenly I'm surrounded by all these people. All of them were mesmerized by the torch I was holding in my hand and the games coming to town. And I realized I was as close as any of these people were ever going to get to the Olympic Games. And their enthusiasm and optimism and wonder, I'm thinking about it right now and I have goosebumps. It changed me right there. And I decided I did make the right decision. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And it was the best decision I ever made.
Wow. Love it. Great. Yeah, beautiful summary there. So let's talk Meridian here. They were the IOC marketing agency, but explain it a bit better because, again, this goes way back here. I do recall it vaguely hearing and knowing a bit about the agency, but I don't know a whole lot. So tell us a bit more how what was their role, how they got it, and then, of course, what were you doing for them?
Of course. Well, as you know, ISL at the time was the largest sports marketing agency in the world. They had both the IOC and the FIFA sponsorship remit. They were a sales organization and they were an effective sales organization, but there was some frustration within the IOC, certainly with Dick Pound, who was the head of the marketing commission at the time, and Michael Payne, who was the director of marketing, that that's what they were. I'm not sure if they came to that on their own or if the two principals of Meridian, which was Chris Welton and a guy named Laurent Charapin. Laurent was the guy who went out on behalf of ISL and put the program together with the NOCs. Chris happened to be the guy at the Atlantic Games within ACOG who ran, lack of a better word, sponsorship, sales, and servicing. He was the guy you'd go to when you really needed something done. He was the guy you go to for somebody who made sense, who understood what you were trying to do as a sponsor. Okay. Lovely guy, the smartest person I've ever met. So they got together, Marcus, and decided, you know what, we can do this better and cheaper than ISL. And they went. It was in Australia, and I think one of the sessions before the Atlanta Games, they knocked on Dick Pound's hotel door and said, "We've got a proposition for you. We can put a company together and do this better and cheaper and make it a marketing focused rather than a sales focused organization." Dick said, "Well, we're already, I think, I don't think I'm misstating this." Dick said, "We've already reached at least a red line agreement with ISL to renew them. So whatever you got to say it fast." Long story short, they made a proposal to the IOC. The IOC Foundation would own 25% of Meridian. Meridian would own 70%. The individuals would own 75% of it. So the premise there was, we can bring in world-class marketing people and pay them market rates. You can't do that within the IOC structure back in those days at that time. Your sponsors are clamoring and crying for a more professional and astute marketing program from the IOC. We can do it. So long story short, Chris called me. I met with him, met with Michael. I had to meet with Dick, and they said, "We want you on board. You're going to run the marketing side, not the deal side." And I said yes. This decision was made probably in the spring of '96, and Delta tried hard to get me to stay. And I had made up my mind. So that's how it happened. Okay. That's how I joined. And Meridian kept that remit for 2 cycles, from '96 to 2004. I got the itch to go out on my own after Sydney. So I left in early 2001. And I, in many ways, it was the best job I've ever had. My job started off just on the servicing and marketing side, and I was able to took me 1.5 years to convince the IOC that they were a brand. I remember walking into Lausanne on my very first trip there, which would have been maybe a week or two after the games ended in Atlanta. Met Michael in one of the EB rooms there. I said, "Well, Michael, I've never been a consultant in my life. I'm not sure where to start. So may I see your marketing plan?" And Michael looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. We don't have one. That's why you're here. You need to write a marketing plan." Okay. And I said, "Well, okay, fine. Well, let's start with the brand." And he kind of looked at me and I said, "You're a brand. We need to understand what that brand is, position that brand." Michael got it. Dick, to a lesser degree, got it. He's a brilliant tax attorney from Canada. So it took 1.5 years to convince the executive board that the IOC, or the Olympics, what I should say, were a brand. And they finally allowed me, through a company called Edgar Dunn, who was put on loan to us by Visa, to conduct a global brand audit for the very first time, to position the Olympic brand as a professional. I'm dealing with CMOs of 11, 12 of the biggest companies in the world, and I know how they work. I know how Delta worked. And they expected it. So the truth is, there were a lot of fathers to that success. And the top partner group in general pushed me and helped me push the IOC to get this done. And after 1 year, we came back. We had marketing data. We had real-time information on how consumers felt about all aspects of the Olympics. It didn't matter if you were a 35-year-old female in Tokyo or a 50-year-old man in Moscow. We were able to prove a lot of very interesting things that people surmised and kind of knew, but to have it proved empirically was pretty powerful. And one of the takeaways from that I still use to this day, which sometimes is taken out of context, but it's true. When I tell people the Olympics really aren't about sport, the sport is the path. It's the vehicle that takes us to these universal values, right, loved by every culture in the world. And it's extraordinary how well that works. And maybe sport is the only vehicle that can do that. But we learned in that research, and the IOC has kept up doing that research for 20 years. They do brand tracking research, et cetera. And they do a little bit of the, I guess, the qualitative focus groups that we did in those days. But I'd probably double or treble those efforts as well. That's where you really learn things in focus groups as opposed to quantitative questionnaires. But we talked to many people who said, I'm not a sports person. I don't really even follow sports, but I love the Olympic Games. So, having that insight and then being able to go back to a brand like, and I'll use McDonald's here, not in a pejorative way. They're no longer a sponsor of the Olympics. Right. But in those days, it was fairly inevitable that one of the print campaigns that they would submit to us for approval, and we had to approve everything that sponsors did, and the IOC still does. They had, I remember one in particular, 5 cheeseburgers shaped like the Olympic rings.
Right. Okay.
And okay, well, we kind of giggle and laugh, but to them it was important. That was their product. They didn't see any incongruence with that in the Olympic brand. But I was able to go to Oak Brook, Illinois, and sit down with all of their people, their senior marketing people, CMOs, et cetera, and show them the Olympic data and say, this is why this doesn't work anymore. And so instead of it being a emotional conversation, which used to go along the lines, I've paid $40 million, I should be able to do what I want. I can't believe you're telling me no. It went from that conversation to, oh, I see. This is what consumers think. We were able to very clearly show them how and why consumers love the Olympics, but very importantly, under what auspices they would support Olympic sponsors. Right. So if it was about logo slapping, no. Again, this seems like an obvious point, but we proved empirically that consumers told us, if you want us to support these sponsors, they have to tell us a story. Right. They have to tell us why they're a sponsor, why the Olympics are important to them, and then more importantly, they have to use these attributes, and we had 40 attributes that we boiled down to about 15 into 2 different levels. They have to use these particular words that we're using to describe the Olympic brand. Right. So it got really, really specific, very, very specific, very fast. And as a marketer, they were used to dealing. It was nice for me to be on the IOC side to go talk to marketing people because I was one of them. So that role at the IOC for me was the one I'm most proud of and the one I enjoyed the most was the brand work. And we really did kick off and start their first ever brand campaign, which was Celebrate Humanity. We got Robin Williams, our TBWA Shy Day, got Robin Williams to do the voiceover for free. Okay. Because he didn't do commercials. Once he heard about the Olympic brand and was shown how it works and what it means, he said, I'm in. So that part of it was wonderful. But I realized quickly, Marcus, that the IOC moves quite slowly, and I didn't, right. And I don't. And I was young, and I wanted to do other things, and I realized it was going to take a long time to convince the IOC at that time about brand management. Brand management was not just a campaign. Brand management, to me, all these years later, brand management actually starts with the bid city selection process. The cities and the nations that you choose should actually reflect the values that you're trying to express. So anyway, I learned all I could learn, loved every moment of it, decided at whatever age I was when I left, I think 42, it's now or never. So
right. Now, the rest of the company was actually involved in the selling, right? So you were more on the marketing side, but the rest of the team was selling the sponsorship packages, just to clarify that.
Of course, yeah. We had 2 main offices. One's in Atlanta, one's in Lausanne. The one in Lausanne was run by Laurent. And they were the aggregator of the NOC rights, and the one in Atlanta that I worked in with Chris Welton, we were the sales and servicing arm.
Got it.
So, and sales in the IOC really means renewals with the occasional sale of a new product category, because the way the categories are described, and you try to keep as many categories open as you can for the organizing committee, who has to raise a lot of money. Yeah. But yeah, the sales side we did in Atlanta, and servicing, and eventually the branding and communications.
And you mentioned earlier throughout, I think that was sort of in passing 40 million or something. I mean, what was the numbers there at that time, right? So if you're thinking 2000 Sydney Olympics here, I guess, was one of the bigger ones you were involved in. Just can you share what was the rough dollar numbers at that time?
Of course, Atlanta was the first organizing committee to charge its tier one partners the exact same rate as top sponsors. It was unheard of. It was, nobody thought they could do it. It was crazy. And that number was $45 million per quad. Mm-hmm. As we were renewing for the next quad, that price was going to go up roughly to 50 to 55, depending on, the sponsor, about a 10% plus. What's interesting about that is the brand program that I just described to you. We did that. We kicked it off in Nagano. That's where we began our one-on-one interviews with IOC. We talked to 5,500 people around the world quantitatively. We talked to 250 stakeholders within the Olympic movement, which everybody from IOC members down to athletes to sponsors to broadcasters to the Great Olympic Circus. Mm-hmm. And we talked to competitive brands like Nike, Disney, et cetera, to try to understand, what was going on. And we did 20 focus groups around the world, including places like Senegal, Russia, China, places that the IOC had never conducted research. Right. We delivered all of that on the day that Mark Hodler let the world know that Salt Lake City did some nefarious things with IOC members and won the games and claimed that they cheated.
Right.
And I had to deliver the brand findings that next day in Montreux, Switzerland, to all of the sponsors. They gave us a standing ovation, which had never happened, and it was terribly named thing. The SAG meeting, Sponsor Advisory Group, was a terrible name. It's been changed since. But at the SAG meeting, we got a standing ovation from top partners, which was just incredibly unusual. Usually it was just a bitch fest from start to finish. And I understand why. But it was deflating most of the time. Now, they gave us a standing ovation. They said, this is great. However, after the revelations of yesterday about Salt Lake City, we don't believe it anymore.
Right.
And believe it or not, we went out and did a 6-month version of the 12-month version we just finished. Mm-hmm. And what did we find out? We found out that the Olympic brand was even stronger. We found out that consumers were appalled at what happened, but they held the IOC and members of the IOC responsible, not the brand. Okay. In fact, they said, we're going to stand by companies that support this brand in spite of all of this bad news. So I will tell you, more than a few of the IOC sponsors tried to put the screws to us and renew at a lower rate. And once we went back with the new data, we got a 10% premium across the board minimum for all of those renewals.
Right. Yeah, that's a powerful message.
That's the power of branding. That's the power of understanding the consumer. That's the power of understanding how that consumer links to what it is you're selling. Absolutely. We would not have been able to do that with a classic old school 99% of the world loves the Olympics. 99% of those people know what their rings are. That's basically what they were selling until we did this research.
Yeah, great story. Now let's move on a little bit here. Then from Meridian, I guess you had a really short sting there with NASCAR, working with George Pine, I believe. But that was quite short. And then obviously you started Helios partnership there. So just jump there, and then let's talk about Helios.
I'm happy to. Actually, there was a step between the IOC and NASCAR. I created a company called Helix. I love all things Greek. So I created a company called Helicon with my friend and former vendor, a guy named George Herthler. who's quite famous in the Olympic movement for his writings about de Coubertin, and he's a true believer, and he's taught me a lot more than virtually everything I know about the emotional construct of the games around de Coubertin's writings and his philosophy. So we started Helicon. Immediately we got Beijing 2008 as a sponsor. It won. Immediately we got Vancouver as a sponsor. It won. 9/11 hit, and our fledgling little business, like everybody's, that was dependent on incremental marketing revenue, stalled. So it was at the end of 2002, where we had a smattering of small clients, but I could see that we were not going to recover, and our business wasn't going to recover for quite a while after 9/11. And it's really hard for anybody to understand now, who wasn't in our business at that time, how devastating that was to just marketing companies. Right. So through a headhunter, I got a request to go down to NASCAR and talk to them. It was a consumer communications position. I'm not a comms guy, although the work that I do is the foundation of what comms people do. Mm-hmm. Let's just say this, I'm not a media guy, but I am a communications guy. Right. So anyway, I got the job. They wanted to make NASCAR much more mainstream in those days. They wanted to get NASCAR drivers on the Today Show and on the front of People magazine in those days. Right. And I liked the people a lot. They were the smartest people probably I've ever worked with. I just wasn't enhanced with the brand, the product. So but they were great people. I was there about a year maximum. Realized I missed the Olympics, and I got a call, believe it or not, from a guy, an Octagon guy in Beijing, through Frank Craighill. And they needed some help for the Moscow 2012 Olympic bid. No one in Octagon knew anything about bidding. They called me. It was a great opportunity to get back into the Olympics, and I did it. Now, that was probably the worst bid I've ever worked on in my life, but it was character building. And, and the Russians, God bless them, I'd spent a lot of time in Russia before with Delta. The Russians kindly said, you worked your ass off on this bid, so we're going to give you Sochi, which everybody in my business laughed. You're going to go from Moscow, which was for a lot of reasons not a good bid, to this thing called Sochi. And so I said, yeah, I'm going to do it. It's a blank piece of paper. I do whatever I want. And we put a team together. And so that's that. So, and
that was under Helios already at that time, or
that was, I started Helios in 2003 by myself. Mm-hmm. Then I brought in Frank Craighill, who, as you may or may not know, is one of the founders of our industry. He had Advantage International, which was a more tennis oriented. Okay. Then he was a chairman at Octagon, and Frank is a very knowledgeable, dear man, and we just kind of hit it off. And he was probably my age at that time, early 60s. I was early 40s. And we both had what each other needed. I was young and aggressive and unboundless energy and freshly out of the IOC, and he was at the other end of what he was doing, but still wanted to work and stay in the game. Mm-hmm. So Frank, I started it, brought him in 2003. It was really around bidding more than anything else. Then we got a call from Samsung in 2005 that they wanted us to be in an RFP to help renew their top deal. By that time, Chris Welton had left Meridian. They had sold Meridian back to the International Olympic Committee in 2004. They took IOC marketing back in-house. By the way, I did interview for Michael's job. That's probably the only job I ever interviewed for that I really wanted that I didn't get. And Timo Lume got it, and Timo, for 1,000 reasons, which was a much better fit for that job and has done an incredible job at the IOC. So Welton, I called Chris, who was semi-retired. I said, Chris, Samsung invited us in this RFP. I want to make my team a little stronger than just me and Frank, and we're competing against everybody. how would you like to just do this on a project basis? And he said, sure, I'll do it. So we got it. We got the business, much to the chagrin of a lot of people in our industry. And so then Welton joined Helios. So my kind of adversary / friend / partner at ACOG when I was at Delta, then my boss at Meridian, and suddenly now he's my partner at
excellent.
At Helios.
Right.
So that's how that happened, and we opened up an office in Beijing, and we found out that we were competing against a gentleman named Chris Renner, also former ISL. In a lot of it, Chris had moved there. He had bravely taken the plunge and moved his family to Beijing to try to take advantage of the opportunities around Beijing 2008. Yeah. He had a small agency there, and so we decided to join forces probably in 2006. So we joined forces with his company Prescient. That brand went away. He became part of Helios.
Right.
And that's that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Helios.
That's how Helios
was around
started,
for almost 10 years.
Yeah. Now, in those 10 years, obviously, you were involved in a lot of bidding processes, right? I remember last time you mentioned 5 Olympic Games, I think 2 World Cups from Beijing, Vancouver, Pyongyang, Sochi, LA. I can't remember the World Cup ones. Let's talk about that, right? Let's get into what exactly it is you guys were doing for bidding committees. I had some other folks on the podcast before who were doing similar stuff, but again, it's such a unique space, of how to work around the IOC, and I think you said that last time. At the end of the day, all it is about influencing 100 people or whatever the exact number is of IOC members. It isn't about you have to convince the whole world. It's really a very small group of folks, and you need to hit them with the right thing. So that's all about it. It's all about how you spin those stories, how you create the story. So share that a bit with us.
Happy to. Bidding became kind of a niche expertise of mine kind of by accident. As a matter of fact, you talk to a lot of people in our world today and they say, oh yeah, Terrence, the bidding guy. Actually, I'm a sponsorship guy, but marketing guy, but bidding is very high profile, Marcus. It is you're on a high wire with no net. There's no bronze, there's no silver. There's a 2-year time limit on it. You win or you lose. And that's what I adored about it.
Right. That's
because
true.
It is all of marketing in one assignment. You have to create a brand, create a logo, create the tagline, create the reason why, create the story, sell it, market it. And then somebody on one day makes the decision whether you've succeeded or failed.
Yeah.
And I just love that passion about it. So, I've worked on probably 11 bids. Still, I will humbly say, best record in the business. I think with 5 Olympic bids I've been a part of that have won 2 World Cups, which were Russia and the United 2026. Helped get wrestling's bid back in the games, golf's bid back in the games, a lot of other ancillary bids. Just recently worked on Doha's 2030 Asian Games bid. So bidding to me seemed pretty obvious what was missing. When I got involved with George Herfler on the Beijing bid and the Vancouver bids early on, it was still a very functional, technical process. Here are a trillion questions, fill out the questionnaire, put a bid book together, come back in, tell us how many airports you have, how many venues. It was a very, very data-driven deal. And to me, what was missing was a story. What was missing was the romance. Right. The reason why. Everybody was talking about the how. Nobody was talking about the why.
Right.
So that's something I knew how to do or thought I did. And so that's how I approached it. For example, Pyeongchang was an interesting one in that they bid for 2010 and lost against Vancouver. I worked for Vancouver.
Right.
They bid, for 2014 and lost. And then for Sochi, I worked for Sochi. Then they were going to bid on 2018. And interestingly enough, what a lot of people don't understand, what a lot of people didn't understand in bidding is to be successful, at least on the branding and messaging part, which is only part of a successful bid. It's not everything. And
right.
I'm not the reason these bids won. I was just part of a great team. Yeah. And the part that I did was an integral part of it, but not the only part of it. But yeah. You do have to have a reason that resonates with these 100 people. Yeah. And it's very easy for you and I or anybody to sit down. Let's look at Pyeongchang, for example. Mm-hmm. In 2010 and 2018, the core message was the unification of the Korean Peninsula. Right. They went on and on and on and on about it. It was important to them. It may be important geopolitically. Is it important to the IOC, to winter sport, to the IFs? The answer to that is unequivocally no.
Right.
So
maybe a few members, but not the largest scheme, I guess, right?
Yeah, okay. Maybe less than 5.
Okay.
So when they hired me for 18, I flew. I remember I ride motorcycles in the dirt. That's what I do. I don't play golf or tennis. I get on a motorcycle. I go across Alaska without getting on pavement. And sometimes you fall down. I had broken something. I was on crutches, and I went over to Seoul and met with them. It was in 2009. And they were ready to hire me on the spot and blah, 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 blah. And they said, okay, so we're going to talk about reuniting the Korean Peninsula. And I said, no, you're not. They said, yes, we are. I said, look, you're not going to do that. You're going to lose again. And if you insist on it, then I'm not going to work for you. I'm going to go work for Munich. And I assure you we'll beat you. So they said, what do we want to talk about? And I said, well, I'll figure out what we want to talk about. But the long story short is Pyeongchang, for example, it's very easy for us to technically and functionally look at the differences between Munich as a bidding city and Pyeongchang as a bidding city. Mm. And I will be brutally honest, and I've said it, I've written about it. Munich had the better bid by far. Munich was Agenda 2020 before Agenda 2020 existed. Munich had everything the IOC needed or could ever want. From the commercial side, winter sport in Europe had plateaued. It's hard for winter sport to grow more in Europe because it's pretty saturated.
Right.
The climate change is changing everything, et cetera. So I sat down with everybody and I said, look, we don't have, I don't know if you've been to Pyeongchang, if you went to those games, but it's a village.
Right.
I said, we don't have the physical beauty of Munich. We don't have the Alps nearby. We don't have all of the venues they have. We don't have a passionate winter games population like they do. We don't have Thomas Bach in our bid like they do. Right. We don't have Katarina Witt as a spokesperson like that. We didn't have all of the things that you would look at on a piece of paper and say, there's every box checked. Munich's going to win it.
Right.
But we need a different story. And that story eventually became a tagline we created called New Horizons, which was about taking winter sport to Asia for the first time since Sapporo in 72. Right. It was a story about opportunity, about growing winter sport in a region where there were more young people under the age of 30 within a 2-hour flight of Pyeongchang than there were in all of Europe. Right. So it became a story about that. And that was a story that it just resonated and it worked. Right. And once I realized that Munich was talking about you have to replenish the routes, you can't go to new markets all the time, I knew we were going to win because they started talking about our own positioning and taglines, similar with LA, for example, in 28. But anyway, that's the bidding piece is fascinating, changed dramatically. You're never going to see beauty contests like that again. I think that's the right thing to do. I've written about it. I've written 100 memos to the IOC about it, going back a long ways.
Right.
That they need to look at bid cities as the first step in brand management.
Right.
And not leave it up to a beauty contest. So that's I think
just for the uneducated here, what is the process now? Just a short version of what is it really now? The big difference to what you were sharing now, in these years when you were doing it.
As I understand it, and it's still in flux. As I understand it, the IOC has taken much greater control proactively in looking at cities and regions around the world as to where they would like their brand to be. This is what I told them. You need to say, where do we want the Olympic Games to be in 4 years, in 8 years, in 12 years, in 16 years? where can it best serve man? Look at the fundamental principles in the Olympic Charter. Your obligation is to place the Olympic Games at the service of mankind. That's what it says. So where generally? So where do we put it? And what's best for the world? What's best for the Olympic movement, rather than just leaving it up to someone else to make that decision? Right. You know, I made the joke, and I wasn't too far off. I think at one point McDonald's, it was a more rigorous process for McDonald's where they put a new franchise than it was sometimes for the IOC and where they put the Olympic Games. So I think now what's happened is the executive board or the games group under Christoph Dubé, they have an ongoing dialogue process with many cities around the world. They tell them what's expected before they can actually put a bid in. They tell them what they're looking for, sustainability. I mean, all the stuff now that is table stakes for bidding on the games, legacy, sustainability, you know, those were kind of weird and new things 10 years ago. Now they're kind of expected. So the IOC, I think going forward, will look for cities that best fit their long-term needs, both from a emotional perspective and from a functional perspective. For example, as you know, they just chose Brisbane for 32.
Right.
They looked and they said, you know, what area, what city have we been talking to for a few years, makes the most sense financially, makes the most sense from a sustainability and legacy. And so the executive board now is making that decision. And then they put it to the IOC members for a vote or for validation. And you and I both know that that's basically a rubber stamp on the decision that the executive board made. And I think that's a much better process. And I hate to say it, I just do, than letting cities get up and do a 45-minute presentation. And you can do a lot in 45 minutes. I will tell you, for the almighty 22 bid that I worked on against Beijing, we went from 26 votes before the 45 minutes to over 40 votes after the 45 minutes. Right. You know, my personal opinion is they should have gone with Almighty. And I've heard from many people they don't disagree, but they didn't really know Kazakhstan very much in those days.
Right.
Anyway.
There's obviously the Winter Olympics you're talking about, right? We're talking to 22.
That's
here.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Now, I remember you last time when we talked about, you had this interesting story about the Senegalese kid and the story about hope. Well, how did that fit into all this again here? I can't remember.
Well, we're rewinding back to the brand work that we did as Meridian, but as I told you, there were 20 focus groups around the world that we did, and you've been in brand focus groups. They're quite different from product focus groups. Brand focus groups have there's a lot of techniques that you use to get people to open up, to get past the thin veneer of the Olympics. You know, typically if you ask people, give me 5 words that come to your mind when you think about the Olympics, they're going to say flame, podium, athlete, stadium, and those are fine, but they're very functional. They're not emotional. And successful brands live in the emotional sphere, never in the functional sphere. Yep. So the Senegal focus groups in Senegal, there's a young man standing, you know, we're behind glass partitions, listening through a translator doing French. My French is terrible, non-existent, as what I would say my French is, restaurant French. So we're listening to it, and you know, through various exercises, we ask people to really get deeper into what the Olympics mean to them beyond those visual, functional things I just described. Young man stood up, and he's looking through the glass. And he can't see us, but I could swear he could. It felt like his eyes were boring into us. And it was one of the most profound moments of my Olympic career. He said, the Olympics to me are about hope.
Nice.
And hope was not a word that registered at all in any of the unaided word association that we did. We ended up using hope as a specific platform. The IOC's changed it. We had 4 platforms that we came out of with that, and they've changed it to 3, and they're probably changing them again as we speak, and that's all good and well. But he said it's about hope, and that was an odd word to hear. We'd not heard that before. And he said, look at me. I'm an African. I'm Black. and no one in the world cares. And it got really quiet. And he said, but when I watch the Olympic Games and I see a person that looks like me from Africa standing next to a white person from the United States or Britain or somewhere in Europe, and he said it just like this. He said, I know that for the next 2 minutes, we're equal. Right. And he put his hands up, pointed straight up at the sky. We're equal in the eyes of God. Right. He said, so I know I'm as good as they are. And that's what the Olympics mean to me. That's what it's about. And you talk about goosebumps, you talk about just tears. I'm still emotional talking about that. That was a very powerful, powerful reminder, frankly, of why these games in Tokyo, in spite of all the criticisms, are important. So, there's a million stories.
Beautiful story. Yeah, that's why I remember it was very emotional when we talked about it last time too, and that's why I wanted to make sure we capture it here as well, and it's a nice way to sort of, and I want to jump a little bit. I know there were a couple other stops to Neo Sports, Engine Shop there, and if you want to, there's something specific you want to mention, but I really want to get to sort of, T-Burn Sports Group, which is your own group of now, of course, as a CEO there. And let's talk about this here in the next few minutes, because you're, as you mentioned earlier, I think you're doing work now, or you did work or doing work on the Asian Games, right, with the OCA on Doha and the Saudi bits there, which again is sort of, obviously not everyone in the world even probably knows these games. Here in Asia, they are very large. It depends on which part of the world you come from. For me, of course, this is bread and butter stuff. So, huge games here. They're actually larger than the Olympics in terms of how many people go there and how many sports are played. And so these are massive tournament, or it's a massive event in this region here. So talk a bit about it, your experience with working with them and what you're doing now.
Well, it was last Thanksgiving, and I got a call that they were going to make a decision on the Asian Games in about 4 weeks, the OCA, and Doha kind of was the only bidder until Saudi Arabia put its hat in the ring about 2 months prior, late last fall, mid-fall. Right. And the call really was about the Doha bid, and there was some concern about its messaging, positioning, and was it good enough? And did it say the right thing? And the gentleman called me. I said, well, look, it's Thanksgiving. It's COVID. This is pre-shots. Right. And he said, look, we really need your help, and we need you to do this. And I said, well, okay, let me do a little research. It took me about a day, and I looked at what their positioning was based on press releases. That's all I could see. And so I wrote a 25-page deck, and I had a conference call with them, and members of the royal family in Qatar are always involved. And so I laid out why I thought they were 100% wrong in what they were trying to do, and why it was time for Doha and Qatar in particular to turn the corner on the messaging of the past, which was, we need the games, help us progress. I mean, Qatar doesn't need anybody to help them progress. They need to help other people progress. Yeah. So
one of the more progressive in the region, for sure.
Well, culturally, economically, et cetera. You can't be Qatar saying, help us have a bright future, asking somebody from, no offense to Mongolia, but asking somebody from Mongolia to help Qatar be more financially successful in the future. Yeah. It made no sense.
Correct.
And it was a gutsy, aggressive approach. I took it. At that point, I figured, who cares? If they hire me, fine. If they don't, fine. I don't particularly want to go somewhere right now, but they bought it. They loved it. I've written about it. I write for Sport Business a lot, so there's an article in there on thinking the global narrative for bidding. And it was interesting because I think that's where we are going. I think that the bidding cities and nations of the future have to make a more compelling case, as I said, beyond the functional thing, which is we have X number of venues, we have X number of this done, we have this experience. That's kind of going to be expected from now on. You'll never see another Pyeongchang or Sochi type bid be successful. You just won't. The public opinion won't allow that. Right. Referendums won't allow that. Now, then they went into, okay, now we have all of that, so we're sustainable. We have a green legacy, blah, 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 blah. We have consumer approval. We have public support. Okay, that's fine. Well, that's expected. What I think, I might be wrong, but it's my personal opinion, based on one bid, which is the most recent one. I think that future bidding cities have to have a much larger cultural benefit, not only for themselves, but for the world. A bigger message, especially now coming out of COVID, especially now coming out of the very, very difficult political construct that's all over Western democracies, which, half of every population is for X and half of every population is for Y, and there's no meeting. So sport can and should finally live up to its stated vision, which is unity, bringing the world together. So that's what I think future bidding entities need to focus on beyond the basics of hosting the tournaments and or events. And I think you'll see it. I don't know if that helped Doha in 2030. I know it didn't hurt it, but I had 3 weeks to change everything: speakers, messaging, speeches, design, everything. And the OCA wisely, politically, gave Saudi 2034. Because honestly, Saudi Arabia had to host an Asian Games. You're absolutely right. It's bigger than an Olympic Games. So much had to be done, not just field of play, not just venues, but just think about the tourist infrastructure that doesn't exist yet in Saudi. Right. 10 years is nothing. 14 years, they'll be ready.
Right. It is really far out. I have to admit, I'm amazed at how far out they are already picking these venues, and it'd be amazing to see. Of course, we'll all be watching Doha next year, or Qatar as a whole, for the World Cup, and I'm certain there will be plenty of learnings there to take forward then into the games there. So interesting work. So this is sort of obviously during your COVID time, and I want to sort of start moving into a little bit, maybe a little bit else. What else is your agency doing, or are you working on any particular projects before we want to talk a bit about maybe on the cool down phase here of our discussion about Tokyo and where it's just around the corner, of course.
As I tell everybody, this is the decade of global sports in North America. Those of us in my business who have, we're global sports gypsies. We've been around the world a trillion times for the last 30 years. Making a living. Right. I've only really worked in the United States for a client for 2 of the past almost 30 years, and that was the LA 2028 bid, where I was a consultant but also served as a seconded CMO for that bid. And I was back in the United States for 2 solid years working. It's funny because a lot of people say, "What was it like working back in America?" I say this tongue-in-cheek, not pejoratively, but I say, well, now I know why people don't like us. And it was culture shock for me to kind of be back with a group of Americans for 2 solid years doing something. It was quite different. But my point is, you've got World Cup 26 is going to be in Canada, U.S., Mexico. You've got LA 28. You possibly might have Salt Lake and or Vancouver in 2030, possibly. Right. So you've got a long runway of these super global events happening here in North America. Right. So I think I work with a young lady named Hae Young Cuddy, who's ex-IOC, ex-GMR, ex-Visa. I work with Jan Katzoff, who you may or may not know, but Jan ran GMR's sports basically consulting thing for 8 or 9 years. Before that, he had a company called Sportsmark, which was hospitality. It's just us 3. And the opportunity for us at a very high strategic level, I think, is unlimited. We're not an AOR. We don't do T-shirt promotions. We don't do hospitality. We can do tactical if you need help. But for example, Allianz is a client of ours. We were hired long after they put out an RFP. They hired 2 other giant agencies, and they met with us, and we brought a level of advisory services that they didn't have with the other 2 big agencies. so, they immediately hired us to help them, help them do their deal. I mean, I know how to sell an IOC deal. I know how to do it from the brand side too. So we've helped them for
so this
almost
was
2 years.
before Allianz had joined, is it? So
they'd already joined.
They had
already signed up. Yeah. They hired us 2 years ago. We met with them. I was in Lausanne with Stockholm 2026, and I said, I'm here. Let's meet tomorrow. I know you're in town. I will tell you about the Olympic brand, because I guarantee you no one's told you about the Olympic brand. Spent 2 hours with them. Boom, they hired us. So, that type of high level understanding of the brand, how it works, what consumers need from a sponsor, plus knowing how to do a deal. I guess my advice to anybody listening to this who's considering being a sponsor for any event is do not sign a BTA. Do not sign a basic terms agreement before you get professional help on how to negotiate an Olympic or a World Cup deal. Right. Once you sign the BTA, you're locked into basic terms and agreements or conditions, and it's quite difficult to extricate incremental value in the long form agreement. And I know my Olympic friends are going to hate if they listen to this. If anybody listens, is going to hate to hear me say that. But my message is to potential or current sponsors: get some help before you sign the BTA. Right.
It can save you a lot of money, and I guess get you a lot to benefits after at the end, right? That's really the message.
Well,
right?
Some, honestly. And the agreements, and I'm looking at a current top agreement. They're different than they were 20 years ago, but not demonstrably so. They're trying to be. And I think that's the other big change you're going to see in sponsorship, Marcus, is this one-size-fits-all agreement. It's just brands are demanding more now. They're wiser than they were. They've got more tools, digital tools, online tools, social media tools. They make these old agreements look like you're reading the Old Testament in a way. They're going to, I think, evolve to more bespoke agreements. Right. For example, why would a bank, just as an example, why would a bank that's an Olympic sponsor need the exact rights and benefits that, say, Visa or Coca-Cola have?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes no sense. I agree.
Well, they don't. They don't need them. They're not valued equitably, but that's the way those agreements traditionally have been written. And I think you're going to see, as younger people come into the movement and displace old people like me, even though I'm aware of this, I do think you're going to see a demand from brands for more bespoke rights and benefits that make sense for what it is they're trying to do and achieve in their verticals. And that's a good thing. That's a very, very, very good thing, because the top program is 40 years old. Yeah.
Let's talk some numbers here. Again, I mean, you've had this beautiful chance to be involved in this so many years, and we talked about earlier, at Delta times when it was 40, 45 million, and I've read some of these things, of course, as well. And sometimes I don't remember whether it's 1 year term, what you read. Sometimes, of course, it could be multiple year term. So the numbers always sound really big. Where are they now in comparison, let's say? About 10x, or where are we landing around now at the moment of these, deals you've seen?
Well, I can share with you the data that's reported publicly.
Yeah,
I can't share with you.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Sure stuff. But I mean, a top agreement today, the rack rate on a 4-year deal is $200 million for the rights fees. That includes 1 Winter Games, 1 Summer Games rights in 205 or 6 National Olympic Committees. It also now includes the Paralympic Games.
Okay.
That's a new twist in the top agreements. The IPC have folded their sponsorship rights for global sponsors into the.
It was not part of it. Okay, didn't realize that. Right. Okay.
So that's a $200 million fee. Now, in the old days, you would get they had these things called agencies of record, where somebody would be your Olympic agency because you didn't have the skills inside of your company.
Right.
You would turn over the reins to pick a company, and I won't use any names, but pick any big sponsorship company out there. They would traditionally say, "Oh, you got to spend 3 to 1 minimum, 3 to 1 ratio."
Yeah.
3 to 1. Because that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to be made at activation fees. So
correct.
I never did that. I thought 1 to 1. I was less than 1 to 1 at Delta because we didn't have any money. We were able to do fantastic things. So I err on the side of caution. And back when deals were 45 million. That's a different construct than a deal being 200 million. So if you sign up for 2 quads, That's 800 million. I mean, 400 million, excuse me.
Yeah.
So even if it's a 1-to-1 ratio on fees to activation, if you're spending 400 million, that means 800 million. That means almost $1 billion, Marcus. So boards, stakeholders, senior management look at that number and they go, well, hell, $1 billion. I know what I could do in R&D if I had that. I know what I could do in M&A. I know what I could do just putting that in treasury bills, what the return is. Yeah. So there's much greater emphasis and scrutiny on sports marketing expenditures for these big events than there were. It's just the numbers that we're at. So, for example, LA's deals widely in the press. For a tier 1 deal. That's a $400 million deal. Now that's over 8 years. Mm-hmm. $200 million is for NBC paid media. Right. LA has tried to be creative and innovative by adding the NBC piece into it. As I understand it, that's, and I may be wrong, but that's for the tier 1 deals mostly. See, yep. But I think the tier 2s probably be some level of commitment to NBC, et cetera. Here's the thing about games in the United States that people forget because we wait so long between the periods in games in the U.S. Atlanta, for example, always gets a bad rap. And I think undeservedly so. I think their marketing staff and program and what they did was groundbreaking. People don't know that the revenue that they raised actually also that revenue paid for new venues. Right. And the IOC stopped that practice after the Atlanta Games. But when the games are held in the United States, a lot of people don't quite realize we do not have a Ministry of Sport. Right. We do not have a level position that is a Minister of Sport. Right. There is no federal funding that goes to LA 28 that went to Salt Lake 2002 or Atlanta 1996 or LA 1984, other than after 9/11, the federal government does help on security. It helps, frankly, our government helps on security for every Olympic Games. So do most governments. Right. So in the U.S., when you host an Olympic Games, like LA's stated revenue targets around $2.5 billion. That's up from 1.9, which is what we had in the bid. Mm-hmm. And I've been around long enough to know that it's probably going to go above 2.5. That's a hell of a lot of money. Yep. That money, none of that's going to come from the government. That means that LA, like every U.S. Games, is going to have to innovate and create new revenue opportunities and be much more aggressive on what they're selling and creative in what they're selling. And, having worked there for 2 years and the people that I know who are there now and the people who are running it, they're going to be maniacal in their creativity and their innovation. You're not hearing a lot from LA right now because they don't want to step on Tokyo. They don't want to step on Beijing. They don't want to step on Paris. They don't want to step on, they got a while to wait before they're going to get super aggressive in the marketplace. But that's what we sold when I worked for that bid and helped create that brand and the messaging around Follow the Sun. Follow the Sun was not an invitation to sit on the beach and drink a pina colada. It was a absolute challenge to the Olympic movement to wake up and look forward and get into the next century, because the sun, following the sun, takes you to the next day is the clunky little metaphor. Right. But the LA bid was completely about the next 100 years, not the last 100, the next 100. And I think you're going to see that manifest in a lot of things that Kathy Carter and her team there and Casey are going to do. They're going to be very, very innovative and creative.
Yeah, absolutely. Casey is a great guy, and I've been following it. I love the logo. I think it's super creative what they've done with it, and how the interpretation of it and how it changes. Right, it's obviously not one fixed logo. It really has so many different facets to it. So, I have really really cool stuff, and I've no doubt again we'll set some grand branding new standards the way the previous LA Games did. Right, so. what was it, 84, right? So
84.
that's right. I have vivid memories of that still, which is always one of my favorite stories when I talk about it. Watching it in my bedroom when I was 16. Now I won't repeat that part, but and I want to also sort of come and sort of slowly wrap it up. But there's one or two before we go to Tokyo. Actually, there was another story I wanted to kind of dig a bit around, and that was Sochi, right? Because there was all this stories and rumors about how much money was spent. And I remember last time you had some really interesting, comments on that as well. Maybe just a short one on that.
Happy to. As I alluded to earlier, my Russian friends, I think, felt sorry for me because I did work really hard on Moscow 2012. But it definitely was a bridge too far in many ways. They gave me the opportunity to do Sochi, and I actually had an opportunity to work for a lot of places, obviously, in those days, any of those bidding cities. We were quickly building a reputation around bidding expertise, deserved or not. That's what we were getting. And so I went down to Sochi and met the mayor, who was one of the first. They had a succession of mayors. Long story short, we sat down that day with he and his team and figured out where to put the first ever Winter Olympic Park. I had a guy with me named Bob Stiles, who's went to work for Sochi once it became an organizing committee, and Bob has passed on, sadly, in 2009. But Bob was the technical guy on the bid, and very brilliant guy, and understood the mechanics of the games and the technical part of venues, et cetera, which I do not. But the long story short about the bid was several funny stories about it. I was flying from Melbourne, Australia to London for something. I can't even remember what it was for. And I stopped in Dubai, and I had a voicemail from a colleague who said, "I'm here in Ireland at the EOC meeting, and IMG is about to take your business away from you for Sochi." And this is in November. And I had been working with a team on the Sochi bid since August of 2005. We were the bid committee. There was no bid committee. Right. It was me and about 5 consultants that I'd hired out of my pocket. I was about $300 or $400 into it. And I trusted my Russian friends because they had never let me down before, and they never have, by the way, let me down. That it was going to happen, hang in there, but we had to write, in those days, a mini bid book and then a big bid book. We had written the mini bid book. We had everything done. We had it designed. We had all the venues. We had budgets, et cetera. And there's a guy named Dmitry Chernyshenko. I'm trying to tell the story in the right way. Dima came in to be the new head of the Sochi bid. And like most people new to the Olympics, you tend to hire big names in the business. He didn't know who we were, but he knew who IMG was. And our friends at IMG were working in pretty hard at that meeting in Ireland, Dublin. And I was told, "You're about to get whacked." And I did get a call from Dima, and he said, "I'm Dima and Dimitri and Mr. Burns. I understand you have my bid. I'd like it Monday morning on my desk." And I said, "I really don't know who you are, but I do have a bid. And right now it's my bid. It's not your bid. And if you think you can replicate everything we've done in 5 months in the next 8 weeks, which you need to do to turn into the IOC with a new partner, have at it. Because what I have is what I've put together in our team, and I've paid for it. And if you want it, here's the terms and conditions." And he was super cool about it, and he agreed, and they maintained us through the whole end of it. So it was a very interesting, quirky bid. It was obvious that the Russian government was behind this bid as opposed to the Moscow bid. It was interesting because there was a lot of starts and finishes. I remember when we did the bid book, the real bid book, we had to print, as you remember, 1,000 of these volumes that were quite expensive, send them all over the world. Believe it or not, Sochi didn't have any money to pay the printer that we used in the U.S., the down payment. So I loaned the money
Wow.
to get the bid books printed. So, it's easy to say Putin and the government was behind it all the way. They weren't really, and they were, but they didn't really understand what they needed to do till the very end. But we're talking about that budget, the $50 billion figure that's often bandied about. Well, that doesn't surprise me. It may even be more than 50 because they built a city to host the Olympic Games. Right. I can tell you unequivocally that me and Bob Stiles and a couple of other people spent about 2 weeks putting together what we thought would be everything, what they needed to do to build, to host the games. It was about $12 billion US dollars. Mm-hmm. It was called the Federal Target for the Promotion of the Sochi region. It went into law, Russian law, $12 billion. That was the non-OCOG budget. Mm-hmm. The organizing committee budget is what all Winter Games are, $2.5 billion, roughly, $2.5 billion. And that's what it costs. That's what it costs. And, that money is recouped through sponsorship and broadcast and marketing, et cetera. So the $12 billion was what it would cost to build these venues, some hotels, et cetera. Somebody in the Russian government decided, we're not going to do that. We're going to build the whole region. And that's what they did. Right. And unfortunately, Marcus, that number 50 got repeated again and again and again and again in the consumer's mind, the media's mind. That became the number that it cost to host a Winter Games, which was bullshit, but nobody ever pushed back on it in the right way. So that started this whole thing about referendums, concerns around cost of the Olympic Games, the legacy. Those are good questions. Those are the right questions to answer. But it was predicated on an erroneous assumption that the IOC demanded Russia spend $50 billion, which is not only bullshit, it's ludicrous. Right. They didn't.
That's good to hear. I think it's a good message, and that's why I wanted to sort of touch on a little bit. And I had, actually, when we were talking about sponsorship earlier, was one other question I forgot. So obviously, I think it was maybe Beijing, at least what I recall, was one of the first time I remember that the IOC literally generated more revenue than the IOC with their top program, or at least in the similar ballpark. And since then, I'm sure it's probably been like that way. Where is it right now? If you compare an IOC pack, they say the top package versus the low-cost package, where are they? Are they similar, or it really depends heavily on which part of the world the events are?
The tier one deals are similar. Right. For example, if you can make the guess that if an LA 8-year deal is $400 million, you can make the guess that a 4-year deal is $200 million for a tier one. That's the same rack rate as a global sponsorship. I would say this about 200. Yeah. So I'd say this about sponsorships are funny things, and you really need to look at the economic environment, the political environment of the host country. China overperformed magnificently on, maybe not magnificently the way Tokyo has, but overperformed on local sponsorships for a lot of reasons. But back in those days, they weren't market-driven reasons.
Absolutely.
So they are national-driven reasons, and I would say this with the greatest respect to our friends in Tokyo 2020, who raised $3 billion for local sponsors to participate in those games. There's not enough, and those people only have rights in Japan, right? And only for 4 years. There's not enough people and not enough time to recoup that from a traditional ROI. So in a lot of countries, the sponsorship revenue gets tied up into national prestige. Dentsu has been a huge component of nation projecting. So you have market-driven deals, and you have other type of incentive-driven deals, which tend to be nationalistic and or projecting prestige, saving face, blah, blah, blah. And you have to differentiate between the two. And I think the Olympic movement sometimes confuses those two things. And I think LA will be a great test to see if these super high local levels that we've seen come out of places like China and Japan, for example, will they hold up in a very dynamic, super competitive market like the United States? So that remains to be seen.
Yeah.
I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. But market forces here in the U.S. will drive the value of those LA deals, because just in LA alone, there's like over 10 college programs that have sponsorships. There are how many pro teams are in LA? Think about it. You're competing against all of those things. So the buyers are very, very astute. They've got a lot of things to choose from. You're not selling, and the U.S. is quite different, I'm sorry, than Japan or China, where it takes on national importance. The games in the United States, because the way the U.S. is, and I'm not being pejorative, but the fact that the games are in L.A. probably doesn't have a lot of relevance to the people in Tampa or New Hampshire, or it just doesn't. It's not a national point of pride and emphasis like it is in smaller markets and or new and emerging markets. Not being pejorative, that's just the reality of how business works.
Absolutely.
The Olympic business.
No, I would totally agree. So I'll spend just maybe another couple of minutes here on Tokyo. Right, we're just around the corner. By the time the podcast drop, we'll probably be right in the middle of it. Your thoughts, your expectations, your concerns, and your hope for it. Tell us.
My concerns are the same as everyone else. I mean, the pandemic is just math. And if you do the math and you're objective about it, especially with the variants and lower vaccine rates, cases rise wherever you are.
Yep.
And there's a lot of people saying that the IOC and/or is forcing these games upon Japan. That's not the case. There are a lot of people saying that these games are going ahead irrespective of health concerns simply because of money. That's not the case. The Olympic Games have been around since they're in their third millennium, Marcus.
Yep.
Third millennium. You don't make decisions purely based on money and stick around that long. And I know I sound like a believer, and I know a cynic would love to debate me, and I have to debate that all the time.
Yeah.
I worked in Japan for the Nagano Games. I was there quite a while, and I dealt closely with the Japanese people to deliver an Olympic Games. So maybe I have a unique perspective. I have great faith in them. I think they're indomitable. I think they persevere through everything. I think their country is, like South Korea, a miracle. You look at what they've achieved in a short amount of time. Yeah. They'll deal with it. It's not perfect. I feel sad for them and disappointed for them that these games, which means so much to them as a nation, and especially in the construct of, as you know, Asian face, and it means a lot to Japan. And I think in many ways, I had this discussion with a reporter actually yesterday from the New York Times, who asked me, some of the brands in Japan, the Japanese brands, are worried about the brand backlash on themselves. Mm-hmm. And I said, the people who are saying that don't understand the value, the proposition of sponsorship or Olympic sponsorship. My personal opinion is these companies who paid $3 billion and stuck it out and didn't cut and run and stood there with the people of Japan to do these games as best that they can do it under terrible circumstances, I think they're going to be rewarded long term. I think people are going to remember who their friends are. They're going to remember who supported them. They're going to remember who was there at the most difficult time, one of the most difficult times for their nation. And those brands are going to see benefits in brand loyalty and awareness and feel-good issues far past the end of these games. And I think in many ways, perversely, more so than they had been normal games. That's what consumers around the world tell us. If you will show us why you love the Olympic movement as much as we do, we will buy your stuff forever. Right. And that's a powerful thing. That is a powerful thing. So, there's a lot being said about, I think at some point there was messaging about these games being a demonstrable stake in the ground about our victory over COVID. Well, I would be cautious about anything like that. But I do think that they do and they can showcase humanity's indomitable belief in hope and the future. And that's what I think will come out of these games. I pray it will. And it's the first games I haven't been to in 30 years, I guess. So I'll be watching them with everybody else from home and praying for their success. And it's for the athletes at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And it's a nice way to finish off here. We used the word hope again, which we obviously heard earlier in the story. And I think it is. I'm hopeful too, that it all goes well. And and B, that, at least during the games, the world has a chance to, just relax and enjoy and take in what the games are all about. That there will be issues on the ground, that COVID isn't going away right now and continues to, show its ugly face around the world. We all have to, we're living with it and we're all dealing with it. But I'm glad to see it is going ahead. And and I have no doubt, we both know Japan well. I had an officer for almost 10 years. And, we know how not just smart, but also how when it comes to hygiene and all this stuff, there isn't a place in the world which can do that better than the Japanese. So they will figure it out, and I have no doubt the athletes will be safe, and hopefully the country will be safe afterwards. So Terrence, this was fun. I really enjoyed the journey through all the decades here of your career, as well as, of course, all the great stories around the different Olympics, all the way there from, 1996 Atlanta to where we are now here, 2021. And we're celebrating the 2020 Olympics. Funny enough, that doesn't happen that often either. So I wish you all the best here and enjoy the games. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon here. When we all can travel again, and maybe we'll see you there in these events in the Middle East we talked about earlier.
I hope so. And thank you so much for the time and the opportunity. And good luck to you and all your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrence. Enjoyed it. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Sports Entrepreneurs by Marcus Luer podcasts are a collection of interviews and stories. All content in this podcast is the copyright of Marcus Luer. Reproduction and distribution of the presentation without written permission of the owner is prohibited. All rights reserved.